Hello, and welcome to today's TrADE Talk, Strategies for Transportation Alternatives Funding and Implementation, brought to you by RTC's Transportation Alternatives Data Exchange, or TrADE. Communities across America have access to transportation alternatives, or TA funds, from the federal government to expand travel choice, strengthen the local economy, improve the quality of life, and protect the environment. Since 1991, RTC has monitored how these dedicated funds have been invested in order to help stakeholders at the federal, state, and local levels better understand how to and implement this program. My name is Mary Ellen Kuntz. I'm the manager of Trail Funding Advocacy here at RTC and one of the authors of RTC's annual Transportation Alternatives Funding Report. I'm joined today by my co-author, Dr. Torsha Bhattacharya, as well as Mike Smith and Jenny Kramer, two outstanding transportation alternatives managers, here to talk about the tools and strategies that have helped them implement TA in their states. Last fall, Congress passed the long-awaited Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This bill, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or rather conveniently, BILL, contains new money for surface transportation, including meaningful increases for active transportation programs like biking and walking. The bill provides a 70% increase to transportation alternatives over the next 5 years. This is an important increase for the largest of any funding source for trails, walking, and biking. This increase could help meet the unmet funding demand and allow states to prioritize projects that focus on connectivity and equity. The bill also includes funds to increase availability to technical assistance and limits transfers out of the program. As Torsha will cover momentarily, unprecedented demand for funding trails and other walking and biking infrastructure is currently not being met. As a result of new funding and policy changes to the Transportation Alternatives Program under the bill, there's finally an opportunity to close that gap, but states will have to be proactive and plan to maximize the investment. This discrepancy between demand and available funding also further underscores the importance of fully funding the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program, so that targeted infrastructure investment can be made in connectivity. Torsha, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mary Ellen. Hello, everyone. And today what I'm going to talk about is a little bit looking back as to what the TA funding looked like historically, also under the FAST Act. So more recently, what is happening going forward. So this is kind of a snapshot analysis of the past, present, and future of TA funding. I'm Torsha Bhattacharya. I'm the Director of Research here. And in our work on the yearly spending report that Mary Ellen and I co-author, we do a complete analysis of the transportation alternative fundings. And RTC is the organization that kind of puts all of this analysis front and center for all state TA managers to be able to use these numbers and make the case for hopefully more funding. What this chart here shows you is the overall trend in TA funding. And we have seen some years, again, more than others. But over the recent FAST Act, that's all of the vertical bars in orange, the funding level has been around $760 million per year. But how much does that get you year over year? The orange line that you see is the inflation trend line. So every year, even though we have a little bit of an increase in funding, the purchasing power of these funds actually go down, accounting for inflation. So although you see some years it has gone up, the real purchasing power actually tends to be smaller than the 767 per year. Next slide. In the recent past, that's from 2016 to 2021, what we have seen is, according to the apportionments, the obligations rates have sort of kept pace for the most part. But in the recent past, that's 2020 and 2021, our analysis shows that the obligation rates were actually significantly down. And there could be multiple reasons for that. We'll not go into all of that today. But one of the things I wanted to point out is there was this leaky bucket that we talked about last year a lot. There was a lot of transfers historically happening that took funds away from transportation alternatives and put it to other programs or other projects. What we thankfully see this year, as in 2021, is the transfer amount has significantly gone down. It's only $8 million compared to around $400 million last year. So we are hoping that with the transfer level going down and the new bill restricting some of these transfers, more and more projects can actually be funded. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of this 2021 funding. What we see here, again, just a little bit more zoomed in about the reimbursement, has about $547 million, which means we generally treat reimbursement as a sign of project completion. So what we see is somehow some years reimbursement rates are higher than others. It just means that a lot of projects are being completed and getting reimbursed by FHWA. Next one. This is, I think, the meat of the discussion that and kind of an aha moment for us. We were graphing out what the unmet demand was and what the funding levels were. And visually, it's so stunning because the orange line that you see going up is all of this, a total of all of the state funding that had been requested since 2016. As you see, the current demand or the applications that have been submitted by all states add up to a huge $4.4 billion. And the gap that you see is $3.8 billion. So that's a huge gap in what the states demanded and what is in store for funding, which you can see right there is around that 750 range. Now, as the FAST Act is phased out and we have the new bill come in, what it does is tries to immediately go, you see that how it moves up, then you see that line on 2022 is a significant 70% increase in TA funding. And with all of your help, with all of the advocacy and all of portraying the need that this is this huge demand, we need more funding for these projects. I think we are slowly trying to close that gap. But it's very important to remember that transportation alternative demand has hugely increased exponentially almost during the past 2 or 3 years. And I'm guessing with COVID, the demand is only going to go up because now people want to go out and they've experienced it once more. So it's only going to go up. So Congress needs to keep on increasing this funding so that the gap reduces. The gap is really quite huge even now, but over time we're hoping that the two graphs will somehow meet where the demand and the supply of funding would kind of phase out. Next one. This one is a snapshot of the program level funding. And what we did was a quick calculation about what were the pots of funding that states were requesting. And most of it, as expected, were under the bike and ped major umbrella. So about 80% of all funding went there. And rec trails got about around 20%. So 80-20 split in there. So this is the level that we can get to with the FHWA Excel sheets and the reports that they put out. But for RTC, when we collect our project level data from state TA managers, which is super duper important in making this case for increased funding, we can break down into further categories, like even within bike ped, is it going to pedestrian beautification or rail trails or landscaping, things like that. So in order to be able to even drill down further, and being able to realize this whole distribution of where the funding is going, or rather where the demand exists, it helps us better kind of tee up the state responses to any kind of increasing funding, call for increased funding, proposal submission, and things like that. So thank you once again for states that have already sent in their 2021 reports. And I'm hoping that I'm putting in a plug here too. If you haven't, you still have a couple of weeks to send in your data. So that is kind of a very quick snapshot of what happened previously, where we are going with this huge unmet demand. And with that, we, if that's okay, we are going to hold the questions till the end. That's my email right there, torsha@railsdetails.org. If you have any specific questions about the report, analysis, calculations, please reach out to us, and Mariel and I will be more than happy to respond and look at your state-specific data and analysis. With that, I will hand it over to Jenny, who is the Bike Ped Coordinator, Kansas DOT. Jenny, take it away.
Thank you, Torsha. So I'm Jenny Kramer. I'm the Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator for the Kansas Department of Transportation. And in Kansas, that role also includes being the Transportation Alternatives Manager. So Safe Routes to School is under that as well. And we have been lucky also to start receiving state bike ped funding. That started in 2020, and we've been focusing on crossing projects, like improving safety counter or implementing safety countermeasures at crossings on state highways that connect to schools specifically. So we'll be expanding on that as well. Next slide. So I assume this audience has a pretty good knowledge of transportation alternatives. So the reason I was asked to speak today is on some of the kind of newer processes that we have started in Kansas to improve like the technical assistance that we provide to our communities and have greater success with our projects. So, and I apologize, there's someone really loud talking behind me. So we implemented a concept paper process, the last call for projects, and that was done in 2020, and it was for federal fiscal years 22 and 23. We currently have an open call right now. It's for 23-24. We have an overlap because of bill and because of the additional funds. We're very pleased to have just received notification on sub-allocation, and definitely an increase that we will be happy to use up across the state. So the concept paper idea is a way to really get an idea of what communities are thinking about, have them submit what they have available on their project concepts, cost estimates. In the past, they would just submit their full application. We would receive their application. We would find faults with the application. Cost estimates would be completely off. The ability to demonstrate readiness wasn't really there, but instead of being able to provide feedback and have them resubmit, we basically had to tell them, you will need to reapply in 2 years. So the concept paper allows us to find out about what concepts or what projects our communities are thinking about, be able to get some basic ideas, and then provide feedback, recommendations prior to the full application. So then we get those recommendations back. They complete they get the application packet, and then they have a couple more months to actually complete that application. So it also helps prevent them filling out these applications last minute as well. So they'll be thinking about these projects at least a month in advance of what they normally would have. So I am currently reviewing 61 project concepts right now. Next slide. I also wanted to just show a quality improvement project I am doing. So I work closely with local projects, and each one of our projects is assigned a project manager, at least the construction projects, which are the majority of them. And I would, go through the review of the applications, the award, I program the projects, and then all the projects would go into this black hole. And then I would just get updates every month on how the projects were coming along. And often it was like no updates, not calling me back, behind, getting into another federal fiscal year. And so I decided to be a little more proactive and get more involved and implement some interventions to see if we could make a difference in the success of our projects. So starting with the 22-23 cycle, which, as I mentioned, was awarded in 2020, we would have, upon award, we would have a meeting with them to make sure they were getting their consultants hired, which is the first step. And if you get behind on that, then the whole schedule will be behind. We do let most of the projects through KDOT, so are very active in that process. So we would have the meeting upon award, and then every 3 months, basically, until PS&E is submitted. And if you don't know what PS&E is, those are the final plans. The final plans, you got the right of way, the property acquisition, all of that is done. Any permits from the Corps are done and submitted as a large package. So what was key about this is that the meetings we would have would include the teams, a team of the KDOT project manager, which I mentioned uses local projects, myself as the TA manager, the TA sponsor, so like the primary, secondary contacts at the city or county, typically, and then the consultants who are on board to do one or more consultants who are on board. And what was quickly discovered was that a lot of information was just slipping through the cracks. And nobody's fault. It was just maybe that the project manager thought the city knew what they were supposed to be doing. The city didn't know they were supposed to be doing that. The consultants only talking to the project manager. So now we're all talking with each other, and it seems so basic, but it has been a life changer. And right now we are on track to have almost 100% of our projects let within the federal fiscal year for which they were awarded. One even moved up a year. So great stuff, and it's been fun. And I just want to put a plug for the TrADE report, because it's because of getting this information to RTC for the TrADE report that I have 20, 30 years of data. I'm only going back 5 years, but I capture the percentage of projects that were going outside the federal fiscal year, how many schedule changes they had, those kinds of things. And so it's made it a fun project. Next slide. Also, I wanted to talk about technical assistance, partnerships, and resources that are coming down the pike, namely because of the Kansas Active Transportation Plan. So this is a big endeavor. We started actually 2 years ago with the hiring of Tool Consulting, and going through the process of this plan has been a really great experience. If you want to learn more, you can contact me. But we had video series, PSAs, a lot of public outreach. So really increased the awareness of active transportation, of our programs, what's available, and then identifying what the communities needed. It really was a catalyst for our partnerships with health agencies, with recreation. So in particular, we have Blue Cross Blue Shield Pathways program. So the health side, and I come from public health, so that was a natural. I've been working with them for a while, but this helps solidify the transportation health relationship. Sunflower Trails Champion Cohort, this was just started. We serve as technical advisors for them. So I'm regularly presenting on active transportation and transportation alternatives to these groups, like sometimes monthly. And then, yeah, through the planning process, we had, gosh, I think it was like over 20 public meetings, really well attended. We have developed, or they're not published yet, but they're about to be published, toolkits on planning in small and medium-sized communities, typically under 5,000. We'll have a bridge toolkit, bike ped facilities on bridges, and then active tourism. So those were big needs, and they will be coming soon. They can be used by anybody. Our communities will now have small communities who maybe can't afford a consultant to do a lot of the planning work. Will be able to have tools and templates to do it themselves. And that is really important to writing a good TA application. And we'll have crash and economic impact analyses that can be used to strengthen applications, and the argument for active transportation, and then providing resources, funding guides, and almost live is our Kansas Active Transportation Plan and Policy Registry. So I'm working with IT to get that out, so all of our communities can upload their plans. We can map it and have those available to the community as examples. Next slide. right, and just wanted to show an example, or like demonstrate how this outreach and higher level of technical assistance has led to kind of a change in, how we've seen, where we've seen applications come in. Also want to point out that the applications coming in that are received, it's definitely more of a community focus versus just like coming from the city administrator or the consultant. So this was just the last round that we put out in 2020 for the 22-23 cycle. And you can see and just keep in mind the icons are going to be a little different. These are stars. The green dot means they're a first-time applicant, but you can kind of see where it's distributed across the state compared to with this last round. Next slide. About double the number of communities applying, and then you could see, like, keep in mind Western Kansas, very low population, very high ag. So just getting a few more from Western Kansas is a big deal. And Southeast, we have very much a low-income part of the state, so great representation there. So very excited for these projects. And thankful that the bill and the higher sub-allocation came at the same time. In the future, like thinking for the future, we are looking to hire a consultant to provide an engineering consultant to provide more support to not only TA, but to our state funding, to be able to assist, especially rural communities, with grant writing and finding maybe other funding sources that are more appropriate than, like, say, federal funding, helping these smaller communities use that toolkit we have for planning in small and medium-sized communities, and maybe even providing some of that engineering support if they're not able to afford that with their small city budgets. So that is all I have. There's my contact. You can reach out if you have questions. And I am now going to hand it over to Mike Smith. He is the TA manager for Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm Mike Smith. I'm the Transportation Alternatives Program Manager in Michigan. And I was asked to talk about a couple of innovations that we developed in the past and have been using well. I'll tell you about some future innovations we have planned, and then end with our active transportation plan. On that first slide, I showed and now it's here too, all the logos, because for our grant coordinator role, which is our first innovation, they are MDOT staff that work in multiple grant programs. And it's one of the ways that we've been able to afford it in the past, since TAP didn't have an administration allowance. And then it also gives our local agency customers the ability to contact MDOT in this one single point of contact person, and they don't have to know which funding source is best for their project. Ideally, the grant coordinator helps reduce that burden on the local agencies understanding state and federal funding sources, and just lets them talk about everything in their master plan, and tries to be able to help them pick out the best funding sources for each of their planned projects. And that role then stays with them for any projects that we do fund, from the cradle to the grave. And I'll talk about that before we're done. The old way was where the local agencies just had to apply for everything that they thought might be okay, or they even had half a shot at, and would just throw it all at the wall and see what sticks, And so it was labor intensive on the local side, and then labor intensive on the state side, because we had to review all those applications for all those different programs. And we were finding the same projects were all over the place. So the innovation was, with this grant coordinator role, that the local agencies would be able to target their applications to the most likely funding sources, reducing their overhead costs and ours both. And then the bottom of the slide there mentions the wraparound programming and guidance, which I'll weave into the next couple slides. And from our equity perspective, we like to point out that this role helps remove a barrier to our distressed communities, because again, if they don't have the staffing and the ability to understand everything that we do at the state level and what all the funding sources are, we can just provide that to them with this person who can attend their city council meeting or do that kind of thing with them, and just be that expert that really helps guide them. For the second innovation, it's a technical review process. And these are people that I borrow throughout MDOT, as well as our local agency. We call it at MDOT our local agency programs area, because we let all the projects for our local agencies to construction at MDOT, but they're still considered their projects. And so I have experts that come to this review team for TAP, specifically from local agency programs, but our other programs use them too. And for the region planners that we have throughout the state, for the different specialties, like we have a NEPA expert on the review team, we have a state historic preservation office expert, our MDOT historian. We have water experts for water quality improvements and those kind of things. So whatever the application has in it, we assign reviews to those specialty areas. And then they specifically are looking for constructability issues. So even though we don't have design done yet, our application tries to get at least enough information that we can have the ability to find the red flags. And that helps us at that early stage, again, help the agency pick a project that's not so great maybe for federal aid. We might know that there's a state funding source like our DNR has or something that might be better for them. And our grant coordinator can help them with that. Or for the ones that continue on toward TAP funding, they can talk in terms about things about the design standards and how, for example, if the trail's on one side of the road, but we realize there's a cemetery there and there'll be some SHPO issues, they can suggest, would you consider the other side of the road? Would that be appropriate? Would it still work? And so it's nice to get all these red flags worked out and talked about before they've paid for design, because then they're invested in a specific route and they really don't want to have to change it after that. So at that pre-review, it's a little bit of a challenge for us sometimes without design to do that pre-review. But that's what we're really trying for, is to find all those constructability problems. Sorry. And the last thing I'll say on the technical reviewers, because those are the same engineers that are going to assist the agency with getting their project to letting, later when their design is done, that's who's holding the grade inspection meeting with them. That's who's checking their design. That's who's going to let it out to construction. So it's that wraparound that really helps the project not be cold to a bunch of different people, which kind of slows down the review process. All right, now the last innovation here that we've used for some years now too is called a conditional commitment. We invented this. It's not an award. It's not an obligation. It's just a piece of paper from MDOT that says we promise in a future fiscal year to give you your construction funding. I'm sorry, the slides on the screen look like they're going all over the place. The grant coordinator will work with the agency and continue to do that wraparound support where they're supplying us quarterly progress reports as they go through design, they get someone hired, they work out their NEPA process and all those things. We typically give a grant commitment for 2 to 4 years away for construction funding because we're specifically looking with that technical review process on what the schedule evaluation was. How long did our experts tell us they think that it will take that project to meet all the federal aid requirements and get to construction? And so ideally, then we guess right. We don't always, but we try to guess whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 years away, how long we really think if they hire someone today to start design, will they be ready for federal obligation? The next slide, yeah, thank you, is for the process improvement efforts we have in the future that we're planning. Because of our new targets on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want us to take a look at our whole scoring system. We're planning to do a nice review through that, make sure that we're covering things like economically distressed communities and that our pedestrian safety areas, like Jenny mentioned, have the ability to be addressed. And of course, HSIP can be paired with TAP now, so we're going to do a little bit better job coordinating with them. I also want to see us map all of our past enhancement, TAP, and safe routes projects to identify if there are any communities left in our state in that last 30 some years that have never had a grant. Make sure we get something into those communities. And then we're supporting the overall MDOT effort with diversity, equity, and inclusion to make sure as that's the statewide trunk line program is developing things like at least in Michigan, see the state owns usually the main street in every town. That's the trunk line. And so there are other opportunities we're looking at for the Complete Streets idea to get crossings in or safe routes to school accommodations made across that trunk line. We do it now, but we haven't been exhaustive in looking at the whole state. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about here is the active transportation plan. So this is our first time, at least for Michigan, and I'm told it may be the first time in the nation, that in the state's long-range transportation plan, we've combined rail, transit, active transportation with the traditional highway plan. And so we're pretty proud of that. We called the active transportation plan a bold vision, and they're going to drop some of the links in the chat. I supplied one for the overall plan, but it's huge, I know. So then I did a link that's just for the active transportation plan, and that's also really, really large because this is for us to get us through 2045. So it's a 25-year plan. And then the third link is just to the executive summary for the active transportation plan. So in that helps us with our state, because we passed the law in Michigan for complete streets, helps us talk about how MDOT is going to meet the needs of complete streets with all of our internal projects. And then we encourage all the local agencies around the state to also do complete streets. Our plan has the idea that walking and bicycling should be safe and comfortable for everyone. That's an all users kind of idea, where we have to understand that not every person drives to work, even can, or maybe doesn't have to choose to. They should be able to choose if they can walk to work to do so, for example, or to school. And then we noticed in our state, at least for first and last mile, that was usually where our transportation connections break down. So I picked for the pictures there to show the bike racks on buses, because that first and last mile may be where the transit system can't get to someone's actual house or apartment, but they could hit it with their bicycle is a way that we could help make those first and last mile connections. And of course, any opportunities to interconnect with other modes, we want to take advantage of those and think about those better as a state, and providing diverse options that get into the whole improving public health and connecting communities parts. Lots of fun stuff I could get into there, but for time, I'll end it there and pass it off. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much. I think we've got some time for questions now. I think everyone's going to pop back on video here in just a moment. The first question is actually, I think, one for myself and Torsha. It is, actually, there's one for you, Mike. Does Michigan's conditional commitment trigger federal rights of way acquisition requirements for any needed acquisitions or easements?
There's a couple ways you can take that question. We're not funding the acquisition, but as you know, no matter what, I believe, if you put federal aid in construction, our view has always been the property has to have been acquired if it was within the last 10 years to meet the federal requirements, whether we pay for it or not. But is someone looking for more than that with the question?
Perhaps. And just for everyone on the call, we'll share contact information for our panelists after as well. And of course, you can always reach Torsha and I via spending report at railstotrails.org. The next question is, I think, one for Torsha and I. What is considered technical assistance and eligibility for transportation alternatives funding? So for the eligibilities for TA funding, some of that varies a little bit state by state, but you can find the full list of what FHWA allows at railstotrails.org/spending report. That will give you the 10 eligibilities. That includes things like vegetation management, historic preservation of historic transportation facilities, things like trailside train depots, rail trails, and a few other things that I'm sure I'm missing as well. For technical assistance, that can vary a lot, and RTC really, Mike and Jenny have offered really creative solutions in their states. There are many other ways to do technical assistance, and we're really encouraging states to be creative about how they come up with that as we wait for guidance from FHWA. And again, states under the new bill have up to 5% to focus on ensuring equitable access in TA. And we're really hoping that really provides a little bit more equity across the program so that communities who really need it have access to these funds. Here's also, the next question is for Jenny. Who is the call for projects distributed to? Is that going to other state agencies? Are certain bike and pedestrian groups eligible? Who's it going to?
Well, it's not really to other state agencies, but to cities, so municipalities, cities and counties, schools. We have a pretty extensive listserv of past TA communities with TA projects in the past. All of our health partners, so like we've really gotten it through there's a lot of coalitions locally, health coalitions, that we really like to get involved in, and helping to go from the plan to actual priority projects that then the city applies for. So I would say that the locals at various levels, bike ped advocacy groups also receive notification as well.
Thank you. I think this next one is also for RTC. With policy changes included in the bill, are there any preferences for projects such as urban or rural sizes based on population size? And is there a requirement for the 20% match staying? That requirement is still staying in place. And that I would note that we generally talk about it as a 20% match. There are states who have a larger than average share of federal lands within their state that they have some responsibility for. And those states, the match requirement's a little bit less. There's a little bit of a sliding scale that applies to generally states out west, but 20% is a bit of the normal unless you have state funds available to cover that, which is true in a few states. For the urban and rural, there's generally a 50-50 split based on population size, and that will stay in place with some marginal changes to the percentages. And RTC is really of the belief that states have done a pretty good job of doing this, as have MPOs, and that allows the MPOs in the states to work together to build plans based on priorities across the state. Anybody else have thoughts on that one?
Well, because with the new bill, there's the 80-20 split at a program level versus project. We are looking at having some flexibility in the match for communities under 5,000 and seeing how HSIP, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, that is eligible to serve as match too. So looking at that, because it can be, especially if a community has to pay for preliminary engineering, right-of-way, utilities, at 20% match just on construction and CE can be a bit of a difficult thing. We are also including, in terms of rural, urban, I think we're still in that question. We just did open it up. We have 2 large MPOs who get their own sub-allocation of funds, but within those regions, the more rural areas weren't as competitive for that funding. So we did open it up to the Federal Highway Association, federally adjusted, non-urbanized areas of those regions. And there's some mapping tool that you can go and see what those are. But so we opened up our TA program to the non-urbanized areas, or non-urbanized communities in those areas, to give them more options for funding.
So next question is, how long does it typically take for multi-use trail projects to move to construction after the funding award? I think you both might have some insights on that. And Mike, I believe Michigan only funds construction. So understanding what the timeline is from the application to the funding for that might be interesting.
Yeah, we can fund design, but only occasionally have we, because we haven't had enough money. So maybe we're going to get better at that in the future. But we have tended to do higher match in order to spread the work around. Spread the money around. 30-40% match on construction is usual, and then we have funded nothing in acquisition and design. We anticipate most agencies with our conditional commitment that they can use that piece of paper to waive, in public meetings and with funders, to raise money, but it's usually for 2 to 4 years away for construction that we commit the grant, knowing that they have to get through the NEPA process and design, and they also have to raise all that match money. So those are the 2 things we're balancing. Does that make sense?
Mhm. I could speak to the duration. So we, and this goes back to the person who asked about like who we put our announcement out to. We do have a state agency who applies and gets funded pretty regularly, and that's the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. And we are funding statewide rails trails through them. And so right now we have a pretty large project. It was eliminating a detour on the Flint Hills Trail, and it involves building a bridge over an active rail line, as well as improving bridges on in two other areas. I mentioned meeting with our communities every 3 months. Well, with them, we're meeting every month because we were having a lot of delays, and sometimes it is the consultant. And so this way we can like stay actively involved in making sure they're meeting their milestones. And for this very large project, I think we're still going to be able to get it in under like 18, 19 months. So upon award, they're supposed to start their design immediately. In that way, they may get within like the federal fiscal year for which they were funded.
Thank you.
Oh,
I'm going to start. Go ahead.
We did start just funding preliminary engineering or like the design on projects for safe routes to school projects. So for those communities that have an approved master safe routes to school plan, they are eligible for that design, to have the design on those routes funded through TA now.
That's a good note to know, that Safe Routes to School is eligible under TA. So that's a good place to look for some of that funding too. And there's certainly a big overlap between walking and biking and Safe Routes to School. So this one might be a good place to start with Torsha. Over the years, have you seen changes in the portion or percentage of projects that are being funded for construction versus design in some of those earlier phases?
So changes, yes, but it's not a trend. So sometimes what we see is in some years, we get more construction projects in the pipeline, and that kind of also tacks along well with the graph that I showed you about reimbursement, right? So, and then a lot of states are in 2-year cycles. So what they do is 1 year they might put construction as main goals of the state, and the other years they shift to design planning. So sometimes it's hard infrastructure, sometimes it's the planning, but it kind of ebbs and flows. It's not like a specific trend that I'm seeing.
That's also something that's useful when you're thinking about building out network connectivity, right? You can start in the design and engineering phase and then fund it later when it's under construction, correct?
Yes. And with the 70% increase in funding that's going to come along, I think states need to be equipped with RFPs to send out for the design phase and have pipelines in place to make sure that they don't say that there's not enough demand. There clearly is tons of unmet demand. So just having the process streamlined will help to use all of these funds in the most efficient manner, as Mike and Jenny pointed out.
Torsha. Next question. I think this one's for both Mike and Jenny. How are natural surface trails included in your state planning outreach and planning within those communities? Any insights on natural surface trails?
So our Department of Natural Resources has certain types of different trail surfaces with different types of designated users. And I know natural surface is one of the ones equestrians tend to prefer. If they mean crushed limestone, we consider that to be somewhat natural and it's more environmentally friendly. I don't know if the person writing the question meant that. For this TAP program and for what we fund, we tend to go with the 10-foot wide AASHTO standard, which doesn't have to be used by recreational trails or some of the other funding sources, but we do that with TAP and say that we're trying to get to the all users designation of bikes and peds both. So separated pathway is our preferred facility type for our regional trails, and we do crushed limestone in rural areas and asphalt in the city urban areas.
Yeah, I would say that the sub-allocation of TA funds that go to wildlife and parks, the recreation trails program, they're funding those natural surface trails a lot more. It is eligible, anything that's eligible with the RTP, the rec trail is eligible for the TA. It's just not as competitive because we do focus, score higher those projects that improve safety. We will fund natural surface. The only caveat is it has to be ADA accessible, and it can be a lot more difficult to maintain that ADA accessibility with those natural surface trails. So that's often a deterrent, I think.
Such a good point about making sure that all users can access trails, including those who need some of the ADA requirements. This is there's a request for advice from you all about how TA managers can use technical assistance to help local communities. If you've got any insights to share there about other ideas, kind of maybe how you set up the technical assistance programs in your state to be really effective.
I don't understand the question.
Do you have,
Mary Ellen, do you know if they're talking about a specific funding source with that or just in general?
I think in general, if you can provide any insights, perhaps on the pathway to where you are now with your technical assistance programs.
The grant coordinator role that I talked about, I think I would classify that way. Now, they're not engineers, so it's not officially technical, but we say that the projects need to be owned and operated at the end by the local agency. Even in Michigan, even the ones that will be on MDOT property, we say the state can't afford to maintain and operate. So any TAP projects, they need to have a local commitment to maintaining and operating in the future. So we want the locals to be in charge of design because they have to operate and run the project at the end. We want them to feel like it's theirs, even though we're going to control the construction process. So the technical assistance is from the grant coordinator first at a theory level, and then our local agency programs engineers when they're in design and doing things like the great inspection meeting give more direct engineering advice, but we still make the decisions be the local agencies because they have to run the show at the end. I'm not sure if I'm hitting the question there.
But it sounds like the new technical assistance set aside, that 5% could help fund some of these programs, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that
so it
is
could help fund that grant coordinator role.
Is that what I would have called the administration allowance?
Yeah.
Yes, and the answer is a good yes. We've had to manage it without any funding up until now.
But that allowance might give you the opportunity to expand some things if you have the option to do as you please.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I hope that it really helps alleviate those problems at the local level where they are trying to fit something in, like in downtown Detroit, and it's really hard to get to the design standard because they're built out right to the curb, with buildings and stuff. It's just in the way. Yeah, That's where we could use some real serious technical assistance.
Yeah, and we really are looking forward to, I mentioned that consultant providing more engineering support, guidance, technical assistance to communities, specifically a consultant who's very familiar with bike ped facilities and design standards, innovative best practices around that to be a resource so that we know, like as the bike ped coordinator, we have our guidance documents, we can look it up and have answers, but to really have that engineering support and especially looking at as they're going from plan with the really high level routes to a grant application that demonstrates a readiness to take on that project. There's often a big gap there, so helping to fill that.
Yeah. The next question, in some states, there appears to have been a recent shift where the activities are really happening at the construction phase, such as bidding out projects, awarding bids, and then overseeing construction and having a lot more of that performed by the project sponsor or state DOT agencies. Does this appear to be a larger trend? I would say, Mike kind of got into this a little bit earlier, that having that increase in TA funds gives states certainly much more flexibility in planning and awarding more phases of projects. But Mike, can you talk about some of the rationale behind Michigan running constructability?
I'm sorry, how do you mean?
So if I remember correctly, you all are funding largely construction projects And I believe that that has helped speed up your application rate, right?
We have tried to do a good job with our technical review process to guess at the right construction year. And then we understand that there's a body of projects that tend to not make it on time, despite our best guessing. So we try to have a pipeline that stays large enough that when we get to that year, we can deliver the budget in projects.
Yep. And having that pipeline is really critical to states, including Michigan, but many others, to make sure that when you have new funding coming in, that you can get projects out of the door quickly. Torsha, do you have any other insights on that one?
I was only going to say that in addition to just having pipeline, having a long-range active transportation plan, where you're seeing the bigger picture and moving away from bits and pieces of trails to actually closing gaps, where it's a connected, well-connected and safe network throughout your state would be, I mean, now is the opportunity once in a lifetime to do that. So thinking big picture, moving away from just solving like one tiny problem. I think this is the time that states need to take this bigger picture look at what needs to be done to get a safe and efficient bikehead network completed and get those projects lined up and prioritize them.
Great. So we've got a number of advocates on the call today. What can they do to help make your jobs a little bit easier?
Just speaking from working with some nonprofits, it's been a really great relationship just to be able to speak to the groups that they work with who have some influence on city, county governments, and what they believe from their perspective, which can be different from, like what's in the city docket, like on what priorities are, communicating with KDOT engineer, like the area district engineers, like on priority routes, especially. I've really been pushing, like finding out, like if you want bike ped facilities on a bridge that's on a state system, finding out like if that bridge is going to be, resurfaced or built, and then just being really active in those discussions, because if our engineers are aware of something early on, like before, like even the conceptual design start, then there's a lot more flexibility. So advocates can help kind of keep pushing that. Sometimes it's being a little more assertive.
Thank you.
It reminds me of when we went through developing our active transportation plan. We had a lot of meetings over several years of public outreach and engagement. And I learned that while I might think of something like a safe routes to school and getting sidewalk gaps filled and crosswalks safely installed, I might think of that as transportation. Not everyone does. Some people out there, and this might be something advocates could help with, some people have felt like when we talk about biking and walking, that it's recreational only, and it's not a place to be talking about transportation. And I've had to kind of carry that banner some to say, wait a second, there are people who only are able to get to work walking or biking. Or maybe we should be providing those things as an alternate modal choice, just as a way to improve the environment and not have so much pollution around our schools with all the cars idling and those kinds of things. So that public perception, I have discovered, is all over the place, although it's shifting across the nation. But that just taking people the ability to walk and bike, those very basic early human forms of transportation, and still be able to say today that those are transportation, that would be helpful.
I think walking was our first way to get anywhere as individuals, right?
They are bipeds after all.
Yeah.
And even just using the right term, I think non-motorized versus active transportation, walking, biking, it's not obvious to people outside the core. So we have to use the barriers or the languages that we use that people can easily understand and get.
One other thing too, although I don't know if the Rails to Trails folks want to go there, but maintenance is always a challenge to fund. And we don't have any state or federal funding sources that want to fund maintenance that I'm aware of. And so that continues to be a challenge for our local agencies.
Mm-hmm. I would note that maintenance dollars are most commonly seen through the recreational trails program for trails. but that there is a major reconstruction eligibility within the TA program. That's certainly not meant for regular maintenance, but there is, we've seen some trails. The one that comes to mind first is Milwaukee's Oak Leaf Trail, that has really benefited from being able to use the TA funds to reconstruct aged trails that have some long deferred maintenance needs there. Okay, I think we've got time for one last question. So when analyzing the data for last fiscal year, the trend in demand for trails, walking and biking infrastructure, and the demand for investment in connecting active transportation projects nationwide, there's a new opportunity with increased TA funds and policy changes that keep those funds focused on active transportation, right? Do we have any thoughts on how TA can be used to complete trail and active transportation networks? So how's TA being used to complete trail and active transportation networks?
I'll start with one thing, but then maybe Jenny has further idea. We do regional non-motorized. Of course, this is the old term. We're trying to get away from using non-motorized because, as someone mentioned, the public has no idea what that is. But we have these bike and pedestrian committees in every region of the state that MDOT funded originally for a consultant to do. Now our region planners do it in-house. And that committee is comprised of all the local agencies of that region. And so they created together their master plan for biking and walking in those regions. And then we're looking for, as their TAP applications come in, that they claim that they, are on the regional routes. Does that make sense? And so we know that, or we're hoping that we are investing in networks that can make connections between cities and counties and regions, and not just individually isolated projects.
And Jenny, maybe you have some insights too, because I believe that there's a trail in Kansas that connects, will connect to part of the Great American Rail Trail. I forget the name of it, but I believe it's in Topeka.
Oh, the Great Discovery Trail, maybe. I'm not. Is that one? Yeah, we do have like a statewide like rail trail plan, and it shows like and even inactive like rail trail potential that we have, communities will look at that for potential projects. We also like hope that the local plans can be collected and fed into like a larger system. We do have that our designated and priority bicycle routes map. It's a layer on our ArcGIS that our engineers are getting used to referring to. It's even for like shoulder widening projects, like anything on state systems. So that's a big way, and we do try to fund byways to like getting more bike access on those byways.
It's so exciting to see that networks and that connectivity is really being tied throughout the TA program in your states and in so many others. And I think we're about at time, so I want to thank the three of you for this great conversation. And encourage those who are still on the line to reach out to Torsha and I with any questions about the Transportation Alternatives Program. I believe our emails just got dropped in the chat. And you can always visit railstotrails.org/spending report to check out our latest research and data.